Did you know that one of the most famous lines in movie history was never in the script? That's right. Before we get to that, just think about this. Goodfellas came out in 1990 and people are still talking about it today. Why? Because it felt real. Too real. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Goodfellas. Number 20. The movie that almost had a different name. Most people don't know that Goodfellas almost had a completely different title. The film was based on a book called Wise Guy, written by Nicholas Pileggi. That was the original plan for the movie, too. The title Wise Guy was going to be front and center on every poster. But there was a problem. At that exact same time, a popular television show was already called Wise Guy. It was airing on CBS, and it was a hit. The producers of the show had already trademarked that name, and they were not going to give it up without a fight. So the filmmakers had a choice. They could either go to court and battle over a word, or they could simply find something better. Director Martin Scorsese and writer Nicholas Pileggi started thinking. They went back and forth with ideas. They wanted something that felt dangerous, something that sounded like it belonged in the world of the mob, something that rolled off the tongue naturally. Then the word came. Goodfellas. It was a term that real mobsters actually used. It meant something specific inside those criminal circles. When someone was a good fella, they were a trusted member. They were in. They were respected. The word carried weight. It wasn't just slang, it was identity. It was a badge of honor inside a world built on loyalty and violence. Scorsese loved it immediately. It was simple. It was powerful. It said everything without saying anything too obvious. And it turned out to be the perfect name, maybe even better than the original. A small naming problem almost changed the entire feel of the film. But sometimes the backup plan turns out to be the best plan. What felt like a setback was actually a gift. Number 19. Ray Liotta. Almost didn't get the role. It's hard to imagine anyone else playing Henry Hill, but Ray Liotta almost never got that chance. When Scorsese was casting the lead role, many big names were considered. Some well-known actors came in and read for the part. The studio had ideas of their own. They wanted a face audiences already trusted, someone with a proven box office record. Ray Liotta was not the obvious choice. He had done some work in movies and television, but he wasn't a superstar. He was hungry, though. He wanted this role more than anything. Liotta had read the book Wise Guy and fell in love with Henry Hill's story. He reached out directly, which was a bold move. When he finally met with Scorsese, something clicked. Liotta had a certain look, those electric blue eyes, that wide smile that could turn cold in an instant. Scorsese saw something in him that nobody else could quite put into words. He saw someone who could be charming and terrifying at the same time, sometimes in the same breath. That combination is incredibly rare. The studio still wasn't fully convinced. They pushed back. They suggested other names. But Scorsese held firm. He trusted his instincts. And when the camera rolled, Liotta delivered something extraordinary. He made Henry Hill feel like a real man, someone who genuinely believed he was living the dream, even as that dream turned into a nightmare. The studio wanted a star. Scorsese gave them one instead. He just had to build him first. What looked like a risky choice became the heart of the entire film. Number 18. Joe Pesci. Drew from real-life terror. Joe Pesci's performance as Tommy DeVito is one of the most terrifying in cinema history. The way he snaps from laughing to murderous rage in seconds made audiences grip their seats. But where did that come from? Pesci didn't have to look far. Before he became an actor, Joe Pesci worked in some very rough places. He spent time around real gangsters, real criminals, real men who operated exactly the way Tommy does in the film. He knew the energy. He had felt the danger up close. There is a famous story Pesci tells about a real-life moment that inspired one of the movie's most chilling scenes. When Pesci was young, he once made a comment to a real mobster. He told the man that he was funny. The reaction was terrifying. The mobster froze. The room went cold. Everyone around Pesci stopped breathing. He realized in that second that he had wandered into very dangerous territory. That real memory became the foundation for the "funny how" scene in the movie. That scene where Tommy asks Henry, cold and quiet and dangerous, "Funny how? Like I'm a clown? I amuse you?" It is one of the most watched scenes in the film. People study it. Film students write papers about it. And it came from a real moment of genuine fear. Pesci wasn't performing terror in that movie. He was remembering it. The camera captured something true. That wasn't acting. It was real fear, dressed up in a costume and placed in front of a lens. Number 17. The Copacabana shot required. Weeks of preparation. One of the most celebrated scenes in all of Goodfellas is the Copacabana tracking shot. Henry Hill takes his girlfriend Karen through the back entrance of the famous nightclub, and the camera follows them in one long, unbroken, flowing movement. They weave through hallways, past kitchens, through crowds of workers, downstairs, and finally arrive at their table, right as a comedian takes the stage. It looks effortless. It looks like magic. It was neither. That single shot took weeks to plan and days to rehearse. Scorsese and his cinematographer, Michael Ballhaus, had to choreograph every single movement. Every person in that kitchen had a job. Every worker knew when to step, when to turn, when to look away. The camera operator had to glide through tight spaces without bumping into anything. Ray Liotta and Lorraine Bracco had to walk at a perfect pace, not too fast, not too slow, while delivering natural, real-feeling conversation. If anyone made a mistake, a misplaced step, a wrong turn, a dropped tray, the entire shot had to start again. And it did start again, many times. The production team rehearsed that sequence over and over until it became a kind of dance. When it finally worked, everyone on set knew they had something special. Audiences felt it too. That unbroken shot tells you everything about Henry's world, the access, the power, the feeling of floating above ordinary life. The camera never stops because Henry's world never stops. What looked like one beautiful flowing moment was actually months of sweat and planning behind the screen. Shot number 16. Karen's voice was almost cut. Lorraine Bracco's voiceover narration as Karen Hill is one of the most distinctive elements of Goodfellas. Hearing a woman's voice describe life inside the mob felt fresh and unexpected. But that narration was almost removed entirely. During early edits of the film, some studio executives felt that the dual narration, both Henry and Karen speaking directly to the audience, was too confusing. They worried it would break the flow. They suggested that the film should only use Henry's voice and cut Karen's completely. Lorraine Bracco had recorded hours of voiceover work. She had poured real emotion into those recordings. She spent time thinking about who Karen was, a woman who chose a dangerous life with open eyes and somehow found it thrilling. The voiceovers captured that complicated truth. Scorsese fought to keep them. He believed the dual perspective was exactly what made the film feel different from every other mob story. Karen's voice showed us that this world wasn't just for the men. Women were inside it too, making choices, justifying madness, falling in love with danger. When the film came out, Karen's narration was praised everywhere. Critics called it one of the bravest storytelling choices in the movie. Bracco received an Academy Award nomination for the role. The executives who wanted to cut her voice went very quiet. Sometimes the thing someone wants to remove is the exact thing that makes everything work. What almost disappeared became one of the film's greatest gifts. Number 15. The real Henry Hill was on set. Henry Hill, The real man, whose life inspired the entire film, actually visited the set while the movie was being made. This was an unusual and fascinating decision. Normally, real-life subjects of movies are kept at a distance. There are legal reasons, creative reasons, and simple practical reasons. Having the actual person watching can make actors uncomfortable. It can blur the line between truth and storytelling. But Martin Scorsese invited Henry in. He wanted Ray Liotta to have access to the real man. He wanted the production to feel grounded. Henry was a complicated figure. He had been a gangster, a drug addict, an FBI informant, and a survivor. By the time the film was being made, he had entered the witness protection program. He had a new identity, a new life, and a head full of memories that nobody else could touch. On set, Henry watched scenes being filmed. He gave small notes and corrections about how things really looked and felt. He told the actors which details were right and which felt too theatrical. He sat with Liotta and talked for hours. Some of what Henry shared was shocking. Some of it was funny. Some of it was deeply sad. Liotta absorbed it all. Having the real Henry Hill nearby gave the film an invisible layer of authenticity that audiences could feel, even if they didn't know it was there. Real life has a texture that research alone cannot reach. The past walked onto that set wearing regular clothes, and the camera captured its shadow. Number 14. Robert De Niro memorized Real FB. iFiles. Robert De Niro is famous for his deep commitment to research. He doesn't just prepare for a role, he becomes it, layer by layer, until there is almost no separation between the actor and the character. For Goodfellas, De Niro played Jimmy Conway, a charismatic and terrifyingly cold criminal. To prepare, De Niro did not just read the book or watch documentaries. He obtained access to actual FBI files related to the real Jimmy Burke, the man Jimmy Conway was based on. He read through those documents carefully and seriously. He studied the way the real man moved through the world, the specific crimes he was connected to, the relationships he kept. De Niro also met with former associates who had known the real Jimmy Burke. He asked detailed questions about how Burke talked, how he laughed, how he looked at people when he was angry. Every small detail mattered. There is a scene in the film where Jimmy sits at a bar and watches from a distance as he realizes the people around him are becoming dangerous liabilities. His face does almost nothing. But everything is there, the calculation, the decision, the cold clarity of a man who has already made up his mind. That stillness is not accidental. That stillness came from hours and hours of understanding who Jimmy Conway really was at his core. De Niro built a glacier and put it in a suit. What looked like effortless cool was actually the result of obsessive, meticulous, almost frightening preparation. Number 13. The soundtrack was chosen before filming began. Martin Scorsese did something unusual with Goodfellas that most directors don't do. He chose the music for the film before many of the scenes were even shot. He put together a playlist of songs that he believed captured the feeling of each era in the story. The film spans decades, from the 1950s through to the 1980s, and Scorsese used real popular music to mark each shift in time and feeling. Songs by Tony Bennett, the Rolling Stones, Cream, Harry Nilsson, and many others were carefully placed like chapters. Scorsese would sometimes play the music on set while filming so the actors could feel the rhythm of the scene before the cameras rolled. The famous scene where Jimmy watches the bar after the Lufthansa heist, set to the Harry Nilsson song, Jump Into the Fire, was shaped by the music itself. The building, spiraling tension of that song told the audience something was horribly wrong before any character said a word. Choosing music first was a bold creative risk. In most films, music comes last. It is added after the scenes are finished to support what is already there. But Scorsese reversed that. He let the music lead the story. He trusted that the right song in the right moment could do more than any piece of dialogue. And he was right. The soundtrack of Goodfellas doesn't feel like a playlist. It feels like a heartbeat. What sounded like background music was actually the film's secret engine. Number 12. The spider scene was improvised. One of the most shocking and uncomfortable scenes in Goodfellas is the moment when Tommy shoots a young associate named Spider, simply because Spider talked back to him. It is brutal and sudden, and it makes the audience realize that nobody in this world is truly safe. What many people don't know is that part of that scene grew from improvisation. The actor who played Spider was Michael Imperioli, who would later become very famous playing Christopher Moltisanti on The Sopranos. Imperioli was young and nervous, but in the scene he found something real. The tension in that room, filled with dangerous men, smoke, cards, and simmering anger, was authentic. Pesci's reaction, that sudden and terrifying explosion of violence, was performed with such speed and conviction that some people on set were genuinely startled. The way the scene escalates from laughter to death in the space of a single breath was not entirely mapped out in advance. Pieces of it were felt in the room. The blocking, the rhythm, the exact moment the gun appeared. Some of that was discovered during filming. Imperioli later said the experience was unforgettable. He was playing a character who died, and in a way, he understood completely why Spider reacted the way he did. Anyone in that room would have done the same. Talking back to Tommy wasn't bravery. It was just human, and it cost Spider everything. What looked like a simple, terrible accident on screen was actually a carefully chaotic moment of pure, raw filmmaking. Number 11. Scorsese's mother played Tommy's mother. In one of the most warm and surprising scenes in Goodfellas, Tommy DeVito and his crew stop at his mother's house in the middle of the night after committing a crime. His mother is cheerful and welcoming, totally unaware, or perhaps choosing to be unaware, of what her son actually does. She cooks for them, tells stories, shows them a painting she made. It is a strange, almost dreamlike moment of domesticity sitting right next to horror. The woman who played Tommy's mother was Catherine Scorsese, Martin Scorsese's real mother. This was not her first time in a Martin Scorsese film. She had appeared in several of her son's movies over the years, playing small but memorable roles. She was a natural in front of the camera, warm, funny, and completely at ease. The painting that her character shows the men in that scene, a painting of a man dragging a dog, was actually painted by Catherine Scorsese herself in real life. It was her own artwork brought into the film. There is something deeply human about that detail. A real mother, a real painting, a real family story dropped into the middle of a movie about killers. It gave the scene a texture that no amount of acting or set design could have manufactured. The gentleness of that moment made everything around it feel even darker. What looked like a small, quiet scene was one of the most honest and real moments in the entire film. Number 10. The film was shot out of order. Making a film that spans several decades is already complicated. Keeping track of who looks young and who looks old, what year it is in each scene, and how the world around the characters has changed requires enormous attention. But Goodfellas added another layer of complexity. Many scenes were shot completely out of order. This is common in filmmaking, but in Goodfellas it was particularly challenging because the story moves through so much time. Actors had to be ready to jump from playing a 20-year-old version of their character to a 40-year-old version, sometimes on the same day. Hair, makeup, and wardrobe teams worked constantly to keep everyone looking right for each era. But it wasn't just physical. The emotional state of each character changes dramatically across the film. Henry Hill at the beginning is excited and alive. Henry Hill at the end is broken and paranoid. Ray Liotta had to locate those different emotional truths on demand, even when the scenes were not being filmed in a logical order. He couldn't always build gradually. He had to arrive at places that other scenes hadn't taken him to yet. This required a deep internal understanding of who Henry was at every stage of his journey. The same was true for all the major cast members. The continuity team kept enormous notes. Mistakes still crept in. Sharp-eyed viewers have spotted small continuity errors over the years. But the emotional continuity? That held. What looked like a seamless, flowing story was actually assembled piece by piece, like a puzzle built backwards. Number 9. The narration was recorded. After filming, the voiceover narration that Henry Hill uses throughout Goodfellas is one of the defining qualities of the film. Ray Liotta's voice guides the audience through years of crime, loyalty, love, and betrayal. It sounds natural, casual, like someone just talking to you honestly. But most of that narration was recorded after the entire film had already been shot. Scorsese and Pileggi worked on the narration script as they were editing the film. They would watch scenes and then write lines of narration that explained, deepened, or sometimes contradicted what was happening on screen. The narration was carefully designed to show the gap between what Henry believed and what the audience could actually see. Sometimes Henry's words and the images on screen tell two completely different stories. Henry says everything was great. The camera shows us it wasn't. That tension is intentional and brilliant. Liotta recorded the narration in sessions, speaking into a microphone with no costume, no set, no other actors around him. He had to find Henry's voice using only the words on the page. He had to make those words sound effortless, like a man just remembering out loud. That is harder than it sounds. Narration that feels forced can ruin a film. Narration that feels natural can make a film feel like life itself. Liotta understood the difference. The voice you hear over those images is the voice of a man who has already lived through everything, and somehow still doesn't fully understand what it meant. What sounded like casual memory was actually a performance built in an empty room. Number 8. The Lufthansa heist scene was meticulously researched. The Lufthansa heist sequence in Goodfellas is one of cinema's greatest crime set pieces. In 1978, a real group of criminals robbed the Lufthansa German Airlines cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. They stole around $5 million in cash and jewelry, making it one of the largest cash robberies in American history at that time. For the film, Scorsese and his team studied every detail of that real robbery with the same seriousness a historian would bring to a major event. They reviewed FBI documents, newspaper accounts, and interviews with people who had knowledge of the event. The production design team rebuilt the look of that cargo terminal with obsessive accuracy, the colors, the layout, the specific equipment that was present that night. Every element of how the robbery unfolded was worked out carefully on paper before a single frame was shot. But Scorsese made an interesting creative decision. He doesn't show the robbery itself in graphic detail. He builds to it and then moves past it. The real focus is what happens after. The paranoia, the murders of the people involved, the slow unraveling. Because the real story wasn't the robbery. The real story was what that money did to the people who took it. Greed is not exciting for long. Greed becomes fear. What looked like a triumphant score became a chain around everyone's neck. The heist was the beginning of the end, dressed up as a victory. Number 7. Joe Pesci won the Oscar, but almost didn't campaign for it. Joe Pesci won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role as Tommy DeVito in Goodfellas. His performance is explosive, funny, terrifying, and deeply human all at once. It is one of the most complete performances in American film history. But the road to that Oscar was not smooth. Initially, Pesci was not heavily involved in the awards campaign for the film. He was not attending every industry event or doing the full circuit of interviews that often decides who wins these awards. He was private by nature, and the whole awards machine was not something he loved. There were worries that his absence from the campaign trail might hurt his chances. Other strong performances that year were being talked about seriously. But then the film opened. People saw what Pesci had done. Critics and audiences reacted with a kind of stunned recognition. This was something rare. This was a performance that made you forget you were watching a performance. You weren't watching Joe Pesci play Tommy. You were watching Tommy exist. The awards momentum built almost on its own, powered by the sheer force of what was on screen. On the night of the ceremony, Pesci gave one of the shortest acceptance speeches in Oscar history. He said, and this is nearly a direct quote, "It's my privilege. Thank you." That was it. Simple, quiet, nothing extra. After playing the loudest, most volcanic character in the film, he accepted the world's biggest acting prize in 9 words. What looked like modesty was actually the perfect final line for a perfect performance. Number 6, a real mobster. Reviewed the script before Goodfellas went into production, Martin Scorsese wanted to make sure the world being depicted was accurate, not just in its facts, but in its feeling. He wanted people who actually lived inside that world to look at what he was creating and tell him what was right and what was wrong. One of the consultants brought in to review the material was a man with actual connections to organized crime. He read through the script. He watched early scenes. He gave his honest reactions. Some of what he saw made him laugh because it was so accurate. Some things he gently corrected. The specific rhythms of how these men spoke to each other, how they carried themselves in certain situations, what they would and wouldn't say out loud. These details mattered enormously. Real criminals, it turns out, don't always talk the way Hollywood thinks they do. They are quieter in some ways, more careful with certain words. The consultant helped the production understand those invisible lines. Scorsese took those notes seriously. He incorporated the feedback into how scenes were shaped and how dialogue was delivered. The result was a film that people who actually lived that life recognized. There are accounts of former mob figures who watched Goodfellas and said it was the most accurate portrayal of their world they had ever seen. That is not a compliment most films receive, and it didn't come from luck. It came from doing the work, from listening to people who had lived inside the truth. Real knowledge built the fiction, and the fiction became real again. Number 5. The movie divided the Academy. Goodfellas was nominated for 6 Academy Awards in 1991, including Best Picture and Best Director. It was widely considered the frontrunner. Critics had placed it at the top of nearly every year-end list. Filmmakers and film students were already calling it a masterpiece. The word important was being used. Then something unexpected happened. When the votes were counted, Goodfellas lost Best Picture and Best Director to Dances with Wolves, directed by and starring Kevin Costner. The film world was stunned. Some people were outraged. Others were simply surprised. It became one of the most debated Oscar results in the history of the ceremony. Scorsese, who had already been nominated for Best Director before and lost, handled the result with public grace. But everyone around him knew it stung. Joe Pesci's win was a bright moment in an otherwise difficult night for the film. Over the following years, the conversation around that ceremony has never really stopped. Film scholars and historians regularly point to that moment as one of the Academy's most controversial decisions. Dances with Wolves was a good film, a sincere, sweeping, ambitious Western. But Goodfellas was something else. Goodfellas was a revolution. The Academy voted for a beautiful landscape. The world voted with its memory, and in that vote, Goodfellas won by a landslide. Losing that night changed nothing. What the room rejected, history embraced completely. Number 4, Scorsese made the film in under a year. Given the complexity of Goodfellas, the scope of the story, the number of actors involved, the careful recreation of multiple decades, the elaborate camera work, it seems almost impossible that the film was made so quickly. But Martin Scorsese shot and edited Goodfellas in a remarkably short period of time. Principal photography lasted approximately 3 months, and the entire process from the start of shooting to the final cut was completed in under a year. This pace would be considered fast even for a small, simple film. For a production this ambitious, it was extraordinary. Part of the speed came from Scorsese's preparation. He was famous for storyboarding his films meticulously, planning every shot in advance, knowing exactly what he needed before the cameras ever turned on. This meant very little time was wasted on set figuring out what to do next. Every day had a clear plan. Every setup had already been imagined. The actors were expected to know their material completely. There was a creative energy on set that everyone described as intense and electric. People felt they were part of something important. That shared belief kept the pace moving. Working quickly also meant working while the feeling was hot. Scorsese believed that the energy of a scene could be captured only when everything and everyone was alive and ready. He didn't want to rehearse the magic out of something. He wanted to catch it while it breathed. 3 months of filming, a lifetime of cinema. What sounded impossible turned out to be exactly the right way to make this particular film. Number 3. The famous Funny How. Scene was unscripted. We have already touched on the inspiration behind the Funny How scene, but the story of how that scene actually came to life on the day of filming is even more remarkable. Ray Liotta and Joe Pesci both knew the scene was important. They knew it was one of the centerpieces of the film. What they did not entirely know was exactly how it would unfold. Scorsese set the scene up with the full group of actors at the table. He told the other actors that he wanted them to react naturally. Whatever they felt watching Liotta and Pesci, he wanted them to show it. And then he did something unusual. He let the scene run in a way that felt genuinely unpredictable. Pesci had prepared his version of Tommy's slow, dangerous turn. But the exact words, the exact pauses, the exact escalation, those lived in the moment. Liotta recalled feeling actual unease during that scene. He was not entirely sure where Pesci was going with it or how far he would push. That uncertainty was visible on his face. That slight, real confusion and caution, that was not performance. That was a person genuinely navigating danger without a complete map. The other actors at the table felt it too. When the camera captures everyone else at that table going very still, that stillness was not directed. It was earned. It came from the room. The result was a scene that feels like watching someone accidentally step onto thin ice. Every person in that room knew something could break. That wasn't acting. It was real electricity running through a pretend world. Number 2. Henry Hill was furious at his portrayal. And then wasn't Henry Hill, spent years after the film's release having complicated feelings about how he was shown in Goodfellas. He had cooperated with Nicholas Pileggi. He had visited the set. He had talked with Ray Liotta for hours. And yet, when he saw himself on screen, when he watched this version of his life play out in front of an audience, the reaction was strange and difficult. He had moments of anger. He felt that some details had been changed, that certain things had been softened or shifted or made more dramatic than they needed to be. He also felt, in a different way, exposed. Watching your own life become entertainment is a deeply unusual experience. It is not the same as simply reading a book about yourself. The film makes it real. The film puts people in that world beside you. The film shows the violence and the stupidity and the waste of it all with a clarity that is almost merciless. But over time, Hill's feelings shifted. He began to see the film differently. He came to appreciate what Scorsese and Liotta had captured, not just the facts of his life, but the feeling of it. The way it felt to be young and powerful and invincible in that world. The way it felt when everything collapsed. He started doing interviews where he spoke proudly about the film. He called it accurate. He called it honest. He would eventually watch it again and again. A man who was angry at his own portrait fell in love with it slowly. Real life is complicated in ways that even movies can't fully catch, but sometimes they get close enough to make you flinch. Number 1. The last scene was designed to break the magic. The ending of Goodfellas is one of the most deliberate and brilliant final moments in American cinema. After nearly 2.5 hours of incredible camera work, rich music, and intoxicating storytelling, the film does something radical. Henry Hill, now in witness protection, turns directly to the camera, looks straight at the audience, and the film ends. Then, over the final credits, the screen is filled with the image of Tommy DeVito firing a gun directly at the camera. It is loud and startling. And then it's over. Martin Scorsese made these choices with complete intention. He wanted the ending to function like a bucket of cold water. Throughout the film, the audience has been seduced. The music, the movement, the energy, all of it pulls you in. You feel, almost against your will, the thrill of Henry's world. You understand why he wanted it. You have been sitting inside that world for hours. And then Scorsese pulls the curtain back. Henry's look at the camera is a moment of shame. He is no longer cool. He is no longer powerful. He is a man in a robe in a suburb getting his morning paper. And he is miserable. He misses being a gangster. He will probably always miss it. And he knows it means nothing. That look breaks the spell deliberately. Scorsese wanted the audience to feel the hangover. He wanted you to realize that you had been enjoying something you perhaps should not have enjoyed quite so freely. Tommy firing at the camera is a direct quote from an early silent western called The Great Train Robbery from 1903, one of cinema's first big action moments. Scorsese was reminding you that crime stories have been seducing audiences for over a century. Nothing is new. We keep watching. We keep being drawn in. And then the lights come back on. That wasn't an ending. It was a mirror. Bonus fact: the hidden technique. Behind the film's restless energy, people who love Goodfellas often describe the experience of watching it as something like being unable to sit still. The film has a forward-rushing energy that feels different from almost any other movie. You feel like you're always moving, always inside something, always being pulled forward into the next moment. That feeling didn't happen by accident. It was the result of a specific, deliberate, and somewhat radical technical approach that Martin Scorsese and his editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, developed together. Thelma Schoonmaker has edited most of Scorsese's films and is considered one of the greatest editors in the history of cinema. For Goodfellas, she and Scorsese made choices about pacing and cutting that broke many of the established rules of film editing. Traditional film editing often follows what is called the invisible cut, the idea that the audience should never notice when one shot ends and another begins. The cuts should be smooth. They should feel natural. They should disappear. Schoonmaker and Scorsese deliberately broke that rule in Goodfellas. Some cuts are abrupt. Some transitions are intentionally jarring. Some scenes end a beat earlier than you expect. This was not careless or accidental. It was designed to create a feeling of instability, of urgency, of a world that never slows down long enough for you to get comfortable in it. The editing rhythm mirrors Henry's own psychology, always moving, always looking over his shoulder, never able to rest. There is also a technique called freeze frame, used at key emotional moments in the film. These freezes pull you out of the movement suddenly, like a held breath. They give you a second to look at what is happening before the film rushes forward again. Schoonmaker has spoken in interviews about the intense and joyful collaboration she had with Scorsese on this film. They were not just cutting scenes together. They were building a feeling, constructing an emotional world out of thousands of tiny choices about time. Each cut was a heartbeat. Each freeze was a held breath. The restless energy you feel watching Goodfellas is not the story. It is the editing. It is the invisible hand moving beneath every image, keeping you slightly off balance, slightly breathless, slightly unable to look away. Old techniques, reimagined completely. Classic tools used to build something that felt unlike anything before it. Old tools, new magic. Goodfellas is not just a movie about crime. It is a movie about wanting things too much. It is about the thrill of belonging and the price of that belonging. It is about loyalty and betrayal and the way we can convince ourselves that wrong is right when the money is good and the music is playing. Martin Scorsese made something that is still being studied, still being talked about, still being felt, more than 30 years later. The people who made this film, the actors, the crew, the editor, the writer, all brought something real to it, something true, something human. The facts behind the scenes tell us what we already felt watching it. This film was built from real fear, real memory, real obsession, and real love for cinema. That combination doesn't come around very often. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.